The snow came early that winter of 1897, dusting Timber Creek's main street before Thanksgiving even arrived. I remember because I was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the Silver Dollar when the stranger rode in. Young fellow, maybe 25, with a satchel that marked him as one of those Eastern journalists, the kind who came west looking for stories about gunfighters and cattle rustlers to sell back in New York. He tied his horse and stepped into my saloon, shaking snow from his coat. "You Frank McGrath?" he asked, already pulling out a notebook. I nodded, continued wiping down the bar. "You learn in this business not to volunteer anything until you know what's being asked." "I've heard rumors," he said, "about something that happened here, 15 years back. They're calling it the Phantom of Timber Creek. Some say it's just a legend. Others say it really happened." I set down my rag, looked at him good and hard. "Son, pull up a chair," I said. "That's a story worth telling, right?" He sat. I poured 2 whiskeys, even though the sun hadn't set yet. "What I'm about to tell you happened in the spring of 1882. Winter was just turning, and the high country snow was melting. I was here. I saw most of it. What I didn't see I pieced together from those who did. And some parts I figured out years later, when all the pieces finally fit." The young man leaned forward, pencil ready. "But first, you need to understand something," I continued. "There are legends, and then there's truth. Sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes they ain't. What I'm going to tell you is the truth. Whether you print it as truth or turn it into another dime novel lie, that's on your conscience." He nodded, eager. "They always are." "It started," I said, the way most trouble does in Montana Territory, with greed and a mistake. 3 weeks before it all happened, 8 men rode into Timber Creek on a Tuesday afternoon. March had just turned, bringing that restless weather we get in the high country. Cold nights, warm days, mud everywhere. I was behind the bar when they came in. You notice things, tending bar for 20 years, especially when you served as a cavalry scout before that. These weren't ordinary drovers passing through. They dressed well, too well for ranch hands. Their horses were quality stock, well-fed and well-shod, but it was the way they moved that caught my attention. 4 of them had that military bearing you can't fake, the kind that comes from drilling and discipline. Their leader wore a distinctive red leather vest, tall man, forked black beard, cavalry saber strapped alongside a modern Colt revolver. He introduced himself as Isaiah Coulter, said they were just passing through on their way to Helena. I served them whiskey and kept my mouth shut, watched. They stayed 2 hours, drank moderately, talked quietly among themselves. But I saw the way the one with gray hair, military cut, ramrod straight, kept studying the street through my window, the way another made notes in a small book, the way they asked casual questions about the nearby ranches. "Who owns the big spread east of town?" one asked. "That'd be the Bartee," I said. "Thomas Blackwood's place, was his place. He died last winter. His widow runs it now." "Widow?" The red-vested leader, Coulter, perked up at that. "Woman alone?" "She manages," I said, my tone making it clear I wasn't interested in further discussion. They paid and left. But I saw them stop on the street pointing toward the mountains, saw the one with the notebook sketch something, saw the gray-haired man shake his head like he was disagreeing with a plan. That night, I told Sheriff Porter about them. Dan was a good man, but young, only been wearing the badge 2 years. Hadn't seen war, didn't know what I knew about men who moved like soldiers but weren't in uniform anymore. "Probably just drovers," he said. "Maybe," I replied. But I didn't believe it. Katherine Blackwood woke every morning before dawn, had for as long as anyone in Timber Creek could remember. I'd see her sometimes when I opened the saloon at first light. She'd ride into town in her buckboard, usually once a week, for supplies. A woman of maybe 46 years, though the frontier had a way of making it hard to tell ages. Her black hair carried streaks of silver at the temples. She wore it pulled back tight, practical as everything else about her, the scar running from her right temple to her jaw. Folks in town had different stories about that. Some said it was from a riding accident. Others claimed a broken window during a storm. Katherine herself never spoke of it, and nobody was fool enough to ask directly. she kept to herself, polite but distant, would nod good morning, conduct her business, then head back to her ranch 7 miles east. The Blackwood place sat in a valley backed up against pine-covered slopes. Good water, good grass. Thomas had chosen well when he'd claimed it back in '67. Thomas. Now there was a man this town had loved. Blacksmith, later a rancher, always willing to help a neighbor. When pneumonia took him in the winter of '81, half the territory turned out for the funeral. Everyone figured Katherine would sell the place, maybe move back east where women didn't have to manage alone. She didn't. Come spring, she was still there. Tending the cattle Thomas had spent 15 years building, all 24 head of prime Hereford Angus cross. Especially Samson, that massive breeding bull Thomas had brought all the way from Kentucky. Strange woman, folks would say. Not natural living out there alone. Someone should offer to buy her out, others suggested, for her own good. I never said much, just poured drinks and listened. But I'd seen Katherine handle that buckboard, the way she controlled the horses, with barely a touch of the reins, the way her eyes swept the street when she arrived, noting everything, missing nothing, the way she carried herself, efficient and aware. There was something there, something that didn't quite fit the image of a simple widow struggling to maintain her husband's dream. But I kept that observation to myself. On the evening of April 2, 1882, Katherine Blackwood stood in her barn, forking hay to her cattle. The sun was setting over the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. "There you go, Samson," she murmured to the big bull as he pushed forward to eat. "Thomas always said you were too impatient. Guess some things don't change." She spoke to the cattle often. They were her only company most days. Each one had a name. Each one represented hours of Thomas's labor, his careful selection of bloodlines, his vision for what their ranch could become. The breeding season would start soon. If all went well, Samson would sire a dozen calves by fall. They could sell the young bulls next spring, maybe keep the heifers. Build the herd slowly, carefully, the way Thomas had planned. Katherine finished feeding, latched the barn, and walked to the house. A simple log structure, but well built. Thomas had been particular about his work. The porch faced east to catch the morning sun. A rocking chair sat there, his chair. She couldn't bring herself to sit in it, not yet. Inside she lit the lamp and prepared a simple supper. Salt pork, beans, cornbread left from yesterday. She ate alone at the table, Thomas's chair across from her, permanently empty. After cleaning up, she took out her quilting. This one was a wedding gift for the Johnsons' daughter over in Bozeman, blue and white, a double wedding ring pattern. Thomas had always marveled at her needlework. Said hands that could do such delicate work were proof of grace. She never told him where she'd learned such precision, how the same focus that could place a stitch perfectly could also place a bullet at 800 yards. Some things were better left buried. Along with the rifles in the cedar trunk, along with the medals and citations, along with Captain Catherine Mercer and everything that name represented. At 10 o'clock, she banked the fire and checked the windows before bed. An old habit. Thomas had never understood why she always wanted to see outside before sleeping. She never explained. The sound woke her just past midnight. Cattle didn't normally move at night unless something spooked them. Katherine was at her window in seconds, nightdress exchanged for riding clothes with practiced speed. She pulled her father's brass telescope from its case, one of the few possessions she'd kept from before the war, before Thomas, before Montana. Through the telescope she saw them, 5 riders, maybe 6, driving her cattle east. They used bullwhips to keep the animals moving, pushing them hard through the moonlight. Katherine's hands remained steady as she counted. 11, 14, 19, 24, all of them, every last one, including Samson, his white face unmistakable even in the darkness. Most women would panic. Most would cry. Most would wait for morning to ride to town for help. Katherine Blackwood did none of these things. She watched the riders disappear into the tree line, noting their direction, their pace, their method. Professional work. Organized. They'd planned this carefully. Then she walked to the cedar trunk at the foot of her bed. The worn leather hinges creaked as she lifted the lid. She moved aside the quilts she kept on top. Beneath them lay items that few in Timber Creek County would expect to find in a widow's possession. A Sharps Point .52 caliber breech-loading rifle with brass fittings. A Winchester Model 1876 in pristine condition. Boxes of carefully maintained ammunition. A leather-bound journal filled with detailed maps, and wrapped in oilcloth a Union cavalry officer's coat. Katherine ran her fingers along the Sharp's octagonal barrel. She knew this weapon better than most people knew their own hands. It had been hers since 1862, a gift from General Sheridan himself after Antietam. She lifted it carefully, checked the action. Still perfect after all these years. Some things you never forgot. Some skills stayed sharp even when you prayed you'd never need them again. "Thomas," she whispered to the empty room, "I'm sorry, love. I promised you I was done with all this, but they took everything we built." The sound of hoofbeats interrupted her thoughts. Katherine moved to the window. Sheriff Daniel Porter was riding up, his horse lathered despite the cool night. She met him on the porch, the Winchester held casually in her right hand. "Mrs. Blackwood," he called, removing his hat, "saw riders heading east with cattle bearing your brand. The Raven Creek gang, I expect. I'm truly sorry." "8 riders," Katherine said, her voice level. "They took everything, including the breeding bull Thomas brought from Kentucky." Porter dismounted, twisting his hat brim between his hands. "I'm truly sorry, Mrs. Blackwood, but these men, they're not just rustlers. 2 ranchers up by Helena tried to follow them last month, both found with bullets in their backs." "I'm aware of their reputation, Sheriff. I'll send wires to Fort Harrison and the marshals in Bozeman," Porter continued. "But with the spring melt flooding the passes, help won't arrive for days. By then your cattle will be scattered across 2 territories." Katherine began loading supplies into her saddlebags. "I appreciate your concern, Sheriff, but I don't intend to wait for the authorities." Porter's expression shifted from sympathy to alarm. "Mrs. Blackwood, surely you don't mean to go after them yourself. These are dangerous men, killers who wouldn't hesitate to—" "To what, Sheriff?" Katherine interrupted, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. "To harm a defenseless woman, to add another victim to their tally." Something in her tone gave Porter pause, an edge beneath the courteous words, a coldness that hadn't been there before. "I cannot in good conscience allow you to pursue armed criminals alone," he protested. "I'm not asking for permission, Sheriff." She tightened the cinch on her dappled gray gelding with practiced hands. "I'm merely informing you of my intentions, as a courtesy. At least let me organize a posse." "A posse makes noise," Katherine countered, swinging into the saddle with fluid grace, "follows obvious trails, argues about direction. I'll move faster alone." Porter studied her, confusion replacing concern. There was something in her posture, her confidence, that didn't match the reserved widow he thought he knew. "They've got nearly half a day's head start," he tried one more time. "And they're driving stolen cattle through territory they don't know," Katherine replied, adjusting her hat against the pale pre-dawn light now spreading across the eastern horizon. "Cattle that know my whistle and will balk at unfamiliar handling." The morning sun illuminated the determination in her face as she settled into the saddle. "Give me 3 days, Sheriff. If I haven't returned with my cattle by then, send whatever help you can gather." "Mrs. Blackwood," Porter said quietly, genuine concern evident beneath his professional demeanor. "These men have killed for far less than 24 head of cattle." Katherine's gaze shifted to the distant mountains, already calculating routes and timelines with precision Porter couldn't begin to understand. "No, Sheriff," she said, "they're thieves who haven't yet understood the gravity of their mistake." She touched her heels to Ghost's flanks. The gelding moved forward eagerly, sure-footed and ready. As she rode toward the eastern ridge, following signs invisible to untrained eyes, Porter watched with growing unease. There was something wrong here, something that didn't fit. The quiet widow who made quilts and sold cattle at market didn't ride like that, didn't sit a saddle with that kind of practiced ease, didn't speak with that kind of cold certainty, but he didn't know what it meant. Not yet. I pour another whiskey for the young journalist, noting how he's scribbling notes faster now. You have to understand, I tell him. The Raven Creek gang thought they'd found easy prey. A woman alone, no protection. 24 head of prime cattle just waiting to be taken. What they didn't know, what nobody in Timber Creek really knew, was who Katherine Blackwood used to be. The journalist looks up. And who was that? I lean back, choosing my words carefully. Even now, 15 years later, some secrets deserve protection. That, I say, is where the story really begins, because when Katherine Blackwood opened that trunk and picked up that Sharps rifle, she wasn't just arming herself. She was becoming someone she'd buried a long time ago, someone the Union Army used to call Phantom. Phantom? The journalist's eyes widen. I've heard that name. The Confederate soldiers used to tell stories. A ghost who could kill from impossible distances. A legend meant to scare recruits. Not a legend, I say quietly. Very real. And now, for the first time since Appomattox, the Phantom was on the trail again. I stand, signaling that this part of the story is done. Come back tomorrow night, I tell him, and I'll tell you what happened when a gang of killers met something far more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. The snow is falling harder now as he leaves. I lock the door and stand at the window looking out toward where the Blackwood Ranch used to be, where Katherine lived for 26 years before finally leaving Montana for good. She'd kept her promise to Thomas, protected what they built, recovered every last cow. But the cost of becoming Phantom again, even for just a few days, that's something only she could truly measure. And tomorrow night, I'll tell this young man exactly what that cost was. The journalist returns the next evening right as I'm lighting the lamps. Snow's still falling, heavier now, the kind that muffles sound and makes the world feel smaller, quieter. He shakes the snow from his coat and takes the same seat as yesterday. I pour the whiskey without asking. Some stories require it. You left off, he says, flipping open his notebook, with Katherine riding after the gang. Alone. That's right, I say. April 3rd, 1882. Dawn was just breaking when she left Sheriff Porter standing there, watching her disappear into the high country. I settle into my chair, the story pulling me back 15 years, like it always does. What happened next? Well, that's when we all started to understand that Katherine Blackwood was more than she appeared to be. The tracks were easy enough to follow. Too easy, Katherine thought. Guiding Ghost along the muddy trail. The Raven Creek gang was pushing the cattle hard, leaving deep hoof prints and broken brush. Amateur droving, men who knew cattle rustling but not cattle care. She'd been tracking for 3 hours, moving parallel to their trail, staying high on the ridgelines where she could see without being seen. Old habits coming back like muscle memory, like the war had never ended. That thought troubled her. Katherine stopped at a vantage point, raising her brass telescope. Below, in a shallow valley, the gang had paused to water the cattle at a creek. She counted the men again. 8, just as she'd thought. 2 stayed mounted as sentries, the others dismounted, moving among the exhausted animals. Through the telescope, she studied each man carefully, the way they held their weapons, the way they positioned themselves. The one in the red vest, their leader, clearly, barked orders that the others followed without question. But it was the gray-haired man who interested her most. He moved differently, scanned the terrain constantly, checked sight lines. That was military training, real training, not just experience. Confederate cavalry, she guessed. The way he sat his horse, the economy of his movements. She'd seen enough of them during the war. Katherine lowered the telescope and pulled out her leather-bound journal. With practiced precision, she sketched the scene below. 8 men, positions marked, weapons noted. The gray-haired one she labeled Reed, experienced. She'd kept journals like this for 3 years during the war, maps of enemy positions, notes on patrol patterns, intelligence that had saved thousands of Union lives. Captain Katherine Mercer. Special Reconnaissance Division. That was who had drawn these maps. Katherine Blackwood, widow and rancher, closed the journal with hands that trembled slightly. "This is wrong," she whispered to Ghost. "I buried her. I promised Thomas I was done." But the cattle were right there, her cattle, Thomas's dream, and these men had no right to them. She consulted her maps again, plotting the gang's probable route. They were heading toward Thunder Basin, a natural amphitheater of steep rock walls about 15 miles ahead, the most direct path east. Obvious to anyone who didn't know the country, but Katherine did know it. Every fold of this landscape, every game trail and water source. She'd explored these mountains for 15 years, sometimes alone, sometimes with Thomas, always noting, always documenting. Some habits you never lost. If she could get ahead of them, reach Thunder Basin first, the terrain would give her advantages. Natural cover, acoustic properties that would make it hard to pinpoint gunfire, multiple escape routes. Katherine touched the Sharp's rifle secured in its scabbard, felt its familiar weight. "Just to get them back," she told herself. "Just the cattle, then I'm done again." She urged Ghost forward, cutting across country toward her intercept point, leaving the gang's trail behind. "Now here's something you need to understand," I tell the journalist, pausing to refill our glasses. Katherine wasn't just good at this, she was extraordinary. The best the Union Army ever had at moving unseen, gathering intelligence, picking targets. "How did a woman end up as an Army scout?" he asks. I lean back, remembering what Sheriff Porter told me years later, after he'd pieced the story together. "That goes back to 1862, I say. Antietam. September 1862, Sharpsburg, Maryland. Katherine Mercer was 26 years old the first time she held a Sharp's rifle. She'd come to the Union camp looking for work. Anything. Washing, cooking, mending. Her father had died at Bull Run, leaving her alone and penniless. The Army was the only employer that didn't ask too many questions about a woman traveling alone. General Philip Sheridan found her practicing with a Pennsylvania Volunteers rifle, target shooting at tin cans set up behind the camp. The sergeant was laughing, making wagers with the other men about how many shots it would take her to hit one. She hit all six. 6 shots, 6 cans, from 100 yards. "Miss Mercer," Sheridan said, approaching after the sergeant had paid up, scowling, "where did you learn to shoot like that?" "My father," Katherine replied, lowering the rifle. "He was a hunter, started teaching me when I was 8. Said a gun doesn't care if you're man or woman, only if you can shoot straight." Sheridan studied her. Not the way most men looked at women. He was calculating, assessing. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Track?" "Well enough." "Would you be willing to do more for the Union than wash clothes?" Katherine looked at him directly. "My father died because Confederate artillery had better position at Henry House Hill. They saw everything. We saw nothing. If you're asking if I'd help change that, the answer is yes." 3 weeks later, Katherine Mercer slipped through Confederate lines for the first time. She was carrying maps of artillery positions, supply routes, and troop movements, information that would help General McClellan plan his next engagement. When she returned, alive, undetected, successful, Sheridan presented her with a custom Sharp's rifle. "This is the best rifle the Union Army has," he told her. "In the right hands, it saves lives. In your hands, Miss Mercer, I believe it will save thousands." He was right. For the next 3 years, Captain Katherine Mercer became the ghost the Confederate Army couldn't catch, the shooter they couldn't see, the intelligence officer who moved through their camps like smoke. They called her Phantom, and they were terrified of her. Katherine reached Thunder Basin 2 hours before the gang arrived, time enough to prepare. The basin was exactly as she remembered it, a natural bowl maybe half a mile wide, surrounded by steep walls of weathered stone. 3 entrances, north, south, and a narrow eastern gap. Water at the center from a spring-fed pool, perfect for what she intended. She positioned Ghost in a sheltered hollow on the eastern rim, where the gelding would have water and grazing but remain hidden. Then she unpacked her tools. From the saddlebags came several small cloth pouches. Each contained a different mixture, cayenne and sulfur, dried fox scent, crushed herbs that cattle hated. She'd developed these during the war for directing enemy horses, creating diversions, forcing movement. They'd work just as well on cattle. Katherine placed the pouches at calculated points along the basin's southern approach, each positioned to be activated by the pressure of passing hooves, each designed to trigger panic and scatter the herd in predictable directions. Next, she identified her firing positions, 3 locations offering different angles, each with multiple retreat routes. At the primary position, a natural shelf of rock overlooking the basin's widest section, she unpacked the sharps with ritual care. Her hands moved without thought. Load, check action, calibrate the telescopic sight, arrange ammunition in precise order. The last time she'd done this was 1865, 17 years ago, but her hands remembered perfectly. That should have comforted her. Instead, it terrified her. "I'm not her anymore," Katherine whispered, touching the wedding ring she'd moved to a chain around her neck, didn't want it catching on anything during what came next. "I'm Thomas's wife. I'm Katherine Blackwood." But Katherine Blackwood didn't know how to load a sharps in under 10 seconds, didn't know how to calculate windage and elevation by instinct, didn't know which rocks would provide the best acoustic cover. Phantom knew all of this, and Phantom was waking up. Katherine removed her dark riding jacket, replacing it with a buckskin shirt that blended with the surrounding landscape. From a small tin, she applied a mixture of clay and ash to her face, breaking up the recognizable human outline that even experienced fighters forgot was visible at extreme distances. The familiar routine centered her, muscle memory from countless operations during the war. She was ready. The rumble of cattle reached her before she saw them, that distinctive sound of forced movement rather than natural grazing. Katherine settled into position. Sharps rested on a folded blanket to eliminate any tremor. Through the telescopic sight, she tracked the first riders entering Thunder Basin. 2 scouts sent ahead, then the main group with the cattle. The herd was exhausted, tongues hanging, several limping. The gang had pushed them too hard, too fast. Poor droving that would cost them weight and health. Thomas would have been furious seeing animals treated this way. Katherine's jaw tightened. These men didn't deserve these cattle. She waited. Patience was everything. The gang needed to be fully committed to the basin, deep enough that retreat would be difficult. The lead cattle reached the first of her planted pouches, hooves pressed down. The mixture activated, releasing scents that caused immediate confusion. The cattle nearest the pouches stopped, snorted, then suddenly surged sideways in panic. The movement spread like a wave through the herd. Within seconds, the organized drive dissolved into chaos. "What the hell?" one rider shouted as cattle scattered in multiple directions. The gray-haired man, Reed, tried to restore order. Katherine watched him deploy riders to specific positions, attempting to contain the stampede, military training showing. But he was fighting terrain deliberately chosen to maximize confusion. Katherine waited exactly 2 minutes. Let the chaos build. Let them commit to trying to recover control. Then she pulled the tin whistle from around her neck. The distinctive 3-note pattern cut through the confusion. A sound these cattle had heard every day for years. The sound that meant food, safety, home. Samson's massive head lifted. His bellow carried across the basin. He turned, moving with sudden purpose toward the eastern rim, toward Katherine's position, toward that familiar whistle. Other cattle followed. Not all of them, she hadn't expected that, but 11 head broke free from the gang's control, moving together, moving towards safety. "What in God's name?" one of the gang members shouted, watching a third of their stolen herd suddenly change direction. That's when Katherine fired her first shot. The Sharps' report echoed through the basin like thunder. Her bullet struck the ground directly between 2 riders attempting to cut off the separating cattle. Stone fragments sprayed upward. Both horses reared, throwing one rider completely. Before the echo faded, Katherine had reloaded. Her second shot struck a dead tree limb above 3 more riders, showering them with rotted wood. The effect was immediate. What had been frustration at losing control of stampeding cattle became the primal fear of men under fire from an unknown location. "Where's it coming from?" someone yelled. Reed's voice cut through the panic. "Spread out! Find the shooter!" Katherine's third shot answered his question with deliberate misdirection. She fired far to the west of her actual position, creating the impression of multiple shooters or rapid movement. It was a technique she'd perfected during Sheridan's Shenandoah campaign. One scout creating the impression of an entire detachment through carefully timed shots from varying positions. The psychological impact was exactly what she'd intended. Disciplined men who moments ago were confidently managing stolen cattle had transformed into hunted prey, pinned down in unfavorable terrain, unable to locate their attacker, watching their prize dissolve into chaos. "Who the hell is out there?" the red-vested leader, Coulter, shouted. His voice carried a mix of fury and genuine confusion. Katherine watched through her scope as 11 cattle, responding to her whistle and the natural herd instinct during chaos, gathered at the basin's eastern edge. Below her position, away from the scattered gang, strategic objective achieved: divide the herd, assess enemy capabilities, establish psychological advantage, all without firing a single shot at a human being. Katherine withdrew from her firing position with the same silence that had once earned her the name Phantom among Union officers. She left the Raven Creek gang in disarray, not knowing they'd been bested by one woman, one widow, one ghost from a war they'd thought was long over. By full dark, Katherine had secured the 11 recovered cattle in a natural corral formed by rock outcroppings and fallen timber. The animals settled quickly, recognizing her handling, relieved to be away from the chaos and the strange men. Samson stood nearest to her, his massive bulk somehow comforting. "Thomas," Katherine whispered, hand on the bull's shoulder. "I got him back, love. I got Samson back." She allowed herself one moment of satisfaction, one moment of relief. Then the weight of what she'd done settled over her. From a concealed position overlooking the basin, she observed the gang's fires as they established a defensive camp for the night. Their formation confirmed her assessment. These men had military experience. They arranged themselves in a protective perimeter rather than for comfort. Most telling was the change in their security posture. Where before they'd focused on potential pursuit from behind, they now maintained alert watchfulness in all directions. Men who'd believed themselves hunters were now conscious of being hunted. Katherine pulled out her journal, documenting observations by the light of a shielded candle. Gang composition, weapons inventory, tactical responses under pressure, the clear military influence in their operations, professional work. This wasn't just cattle rustling, and that bothered her. She looked down at her hands, still steady, despite hours of tension. These were the same hands that used to create such delicate quilts, the same hands Thomas used to kiss, marveling at their grace. But they were also the hands that had loaded and fired a Sharps rifle today with practiced precision, hands that remembered war. Katherine touched the wedding ring hanging on the chain. "What would you think of me now?" she whispered. "If you could see what I just did?" Thomas's voice came back to her, a memory from their wedding night. "Katie, I don't care who you were before. I love who you are now, and whoever you were helped make you who you are." "I'm trying, love," Katherine said to the darkness. "I'm trying to be both, the woman you married and the woman who can protect what we built." But she could feel it, phantom rising, that cold, calculating part of her that had been dormant for 17 years. It had awakened today, and it remembered everything. 13 cattle remained with the gang, 13 more to recover, and something told Katherine this was about more than simple cattle rustling. The military precision, the organized nature of their operation, the way Reed kept studying maps. This was reconnaissance, preparation for something larger, which meant getting her cattle back might require more than tactical retrieval. It might require understanding and stopping whatever the Raven Creek gang was really planning. I pause, noting how the journalist has stopped writing. He's just listening now, caught in the story. 11 cattle recovered, I say. 13 to go, but Katherine was starting to understand something troubling. This wasn't just about her ranch. Something bigger was happening. What was it? He asks. I stand, stretching. That's a story for tomorrow. But I'll tell you this. By the time Katherine figured out what the Raven Creek gang was really after, she'd already decided she couldn't walk away. Even if it meant becoming Phantom again, even if it meant risking everything she and Thomas had built. Because sometimes, I continue, the skills we wish we'd never learned are the only things that can protect what we love most. The snow is still falling as the journalist leaves. I lock up and sit alone in the dark saloon, remembering. Katherine recovered all 24 cattle. That part of the story has a happy ending, but what she had to become to do it, what she had to resurrect from a past she'd tried so hard to bury that cost her in ways most folks never understood. Tomorrow, I'll tell him about Devil's Teeth Canyon, about what she discovered there, about the night she became Phantom completely, maybe for the last time, and about the choice she faced: stay Katherine Blackwood, quiet widow, and let innocent people die, or become Phantom one more time and save them all. She chose to save them, and that choice changed everything. The journalist arrives early on the third evening, before I've even lit all the lamps. Snow's turned to sleet now, rattling against the windows like buckshot. Couldn't wait, he admits, shaking ice from his coat. Need to know what happened next. I smile despite myself. You're hooked then. Good. A story this true deserves attention. I pour the whiskey and settle in. Outside, the wind howls. Perfect night for this part of the tale. When I left off, I say, Katherine had recovered 11 cattle, but she was starting to realize something didn't add up. Men like the Raven Creek gang don't just rustle livestock. They plan, they prepare, they have objectives beyond simple theft. And Katherine was about to discover what those objectives were. Dawn on April 4th found Katherine tracking the gang northeast. They'd changed direction during the night, not heading east toward Dakota as she'd expected, but northwest toward the high country. That troubled her. Northwest meant rougher terrain, fewer markets for stolen cattle, less chance of quick sale. It made no sense for simple rustlers, unless selling the cattle wasn't their primary objective. Through her telescope, Katherine observed the gang from a pine-covered ridge. They'd reorganized after yesterday's chaos at Thunder Basin. Tighter formation now, better security. Reed's influence showing clearly, but it was what they carried that caught her attention. The two well-dressed men she'd noted before, the ones who didn't ride like cowboys, had surveying equipment, brass instruments for measuring angles and distances, large documents that looked like territorial maps. Not rustlers, surveyors. "What are you really doing out here?" Katherine whispered, documenting the observation in her journal. The answer came from an unexpected direction. She'd just settled Ghost in a sheltered hollow when she heard the faint sound of hoofbeats approaching from the west. Katherine's hand went to her Winchester, but she recognized the rider before he emerged from the trees. Swift Fox, Blackfoot scout, old friend. He rode a paint pony, moved with the silence his people were famous for. They'd met 6 years ago when Katherine had pulled his daughter from the spring-flooded creek. The girl had survived. The bond formed that day ran deeper than words. "Many riders," Swift Fox said in his careful English, dismounting. "Bad men. You follow them." "They took my cattle," Katherine replied, not asking how he knew. The Blackfoot saw everything that moved in these mountains. "They meet others, 2 days north. Many guns." Katherine's chest tightened. "How many others?" Swift Fox held up both hands twice. "Maybe more. White men with soldier ways." He made a gesture mimicking military drilling. building something at Devil's Teeth Canyon. Devil's Teeth. The name sent a chill through Katherine that had nothing to do with the morning cold. The canyon sat at the convergence of three territorial boundaries, overlooking the primary route used by military supply wagons traveling between Fort Harrison and the Canadian border outposts. Perfect position for ambush, for intercepting supply trains, for controlling movement across the territory. "What are they building?" Katherine asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Platform. High. For guns." Swift Fox's dark eyes studied her face. "The elders say, when White Hawk hunts, wise men watch from far away." Katherine's breath caught. White Hawk. The name the Blackfoot had given her years ago, after she delivered medicine to their village during a smallpox outbreak. They'd always known more about her past than any white settler. "I'm not hunting," Katherine said quietly. "Just recovering what's mine." Swift Fox's expression didn't change. "White Hawk does not lie to herself. These men plan death. You will stop them." It wasn't a question. He handed her a small leather pouch. "Pemmican, you will need strength." Then he mounted his pony and rode away as silently as he'd arrived, leaving Katherine alone with a choice she didn't want to make. This was bigger than cattle now. This was a military operation targeting federal supply routes. If she pursued her remaining 13 head to Devil's Teeth, she'd be walking into a fortified position with 20 armed men. The smart choice was to take her 11 recovered cattle, ride back to Timber Creek, and let the Army handle it. But by the time the Army responded, innocent soldiers would be dead, ambushed by men building firing platforms in canyons they thought were safe. Katherine looked at the pouch in her hand, looked toward the mountains, thought about Thomas. "What would you want me to do, love?" she whispered. Thomas's voice came back to her from memory, from the day he'd given her the Winchester. "Katie, evil wins when good people look away. I know you've seen enough violence for 10 lifetimes, but if you ever need to stand against wrong again, you'll know, and you'll do what's right." Katherine secured the pemmican in her saddlebag and mounted Ghost. She was going to Devil's Teeth. "Now, here's where the story gets complicated," I tell the journalist, refilling both our glasses. Because Katherine wasn't just tracking cattle thieves anymore. She was conducting military reconnaissance against an organized irregular force, and that meant going back to skills she'd spent 17 years trying to forget. The journalist leans forward. "What kind of skills?" I pause, choosing my words carefully. Even now, some things are hard to speak aloud. "Infiltration," I say. "Intelligence gathering. The kind of work that requires moving through enemy territory without being seen. The kind of work Catherine Mercer used to do in Confederate camps during the war." And Katherine Blackwood, the widow who made quilts and sold cattle, didn't know how to do those things, but Phantom did. Katherine reached the approach to Devil's Teeth Canyon by late afternoon. She left Ghost secured in a hidden ravine with water and grazing, then proceeded on foot, moving with the fluid silence that had once allowed her to infiltrate enemy camps undetected. Moccasins instead of boots, buckskin instead of cotton, face and hands darkened with ash and clay. Everything about her designed to blend with the landscape, to become invisible. Phantom's uniform. From a concealed position on the canyon's rim, Katherine raised her telescope and studied what lay below. Swift Fox hadn't exaggerated. 20 men, maybe more. Canvas tents arranged in military precision around a central command area. And in the middle of it all, a wooden scaffold rising above the canyon floor, a firing platform positioned to overlook the entire trail running through the passage below. But it was the men themselves that made Katherine's blood run cold. They wore blue-gray jackets with distinctive gold buttons. Not current Confederate Army issue. That war had ended 17 years ago, but she recognized the uniform. Quantrill's raiders, irregulars who'd never accepted surrender. Men who'd continued fighting as guerrillas long after Appomattox. She'd heard rumors they'd scattered after the war, some to Mexico, some to the Western Territories, Apparently, some had found each other again. Through her scope, Katherine identified the leader, broad-shouldered man with a scarred face and a missing left hand, former officer by his bearing. He stood near the command tent, reviewing maps with the Raven Creek Gang's surveyors, and there, conferring with him, was Isaiah Coulter in his red vest. The two embraced like old comrades. This wasn't coincidence. This was coordination, alliance. Katherine shifted her position, scanning for her remaining 13 cattle, found them penned in a natural corral formed by canyon walls and hastily constructed barriers. Samson had been separated from the group she'd recovered yesterday. Seeing him there, exhausted and mistreated, ignited fresh anger. But anger wouldn't help. Only cold assessment would. She needed to get closer, needed to know what they were planning. The underground passage would be her way in. Katherine had discovered it 6 years ago while tracking wounded elk, a narrow fissure in the canyon's eastern wall, barely wide enough for a person to navigate. It followed an underground waterway before opening into the canyon itself, providing concealed access to anyone who knew of its existence. She'd documented it in her journal, along with dozens of other terrain features. Information a rancher might find useful. Information a scout definitely would. Some habits died hard. The passage was exactly as she remembered. Katherine entered the fissure as sunset painted the canyon walls gold and crimson. She carried a small brass lantern with adjustable shutter designed for controlled illumination. The passage ran for nearly half a mile. Water sometimes reached her knees, spring melt raising levels higher than during her previous explorations. In places, the ceiling dropped so low she had to crouch. In others, the pathway narrowed until her shoulders nearly touched both walls. Katherine moved slowly, carefully, letting her eyes adjust, counting her steps, documenting distance and direction in her mind. 20 years ago, this kind of infiltration had been routine, slipping through Confederate lines to gather intelligence, moving through enemy camps like smoke, always alone, always silent. She'd thought those days were behind her, buried with Captain Katherine Mercer. But here she was again, in the dark, behind enemy lines, hunting information that could save lives. Some things, it seemed, you never truly left behind. After 30 minutes of careful navigation, Katherine noticed a change in the air, slightly warmer, carrying scents of wood smoke and coffee. The passage was nearing its exit into the canyon. She extinguished her lantern and proceeded by touch alone, her eyes gradually adjusting to faint light filtering through hanging moss ahead. Reaching the opening, Katherine parted the vegetation just enough to observe without disturbing its natural appearance. The view confirmed her worst suspicions. The firing platform was nearly complete. 6 positions, each capable of supporting a rifleman with clear sight lines across the entire canyon floor. Additional structures suggested accommodation for sustained operations. This wasn't a temporary camp. Men moved with military precision below, patrol rotations, assigned duties. Clear command structure. These weren't simple bandits. They were organized, trained, and preparing for something specific. Katherine spent the next hour documenting everything: guard positions, weapon inventory, supply stores. The surveyor documents spread across a field table in the command tent. Through her telescope, she caught fragments of text on those documents, enough to understand what they were planning. Military convoy, Fort Harrison to border outposts. Artillery primers, experimental percussion detonators, 200 count, scheduled to pass through Devil's Teeth in 4 days. Katherine's hands tightened on the telescope. Artillery primers, advanced military technology. In the right hands, or wrong hands, they could be used for coordinated explosions across multiple locations. Mines, traps, destruction on a scale that went far beyond simple ambush. This wasn't about stealing supplies, this was about acquiring weapons technology, building capability for future operations, possibly coordinating with other irregular forces across the territories, organized insurrection, just smaller scale, more careful, more patient. Katherine withdrew deeper into the passage, her mind racing. She'd come for cattle. She'd found conspiracy. The moral calculus had just shifted completely. She had a choice then, I tell the journalist. Take the 11 cattle she'd already recovered and ride home. Let the military deal with whatever was happening at Devil's Teeth. Stay Katherine Blackwood, quiet widow. Or stop them herself. Recover all her cattle and prevent the ambush. Become Phantom completely. Risk everything she and Thomas had built for the sake of soldiers she'd never met. The journalist sets down his pencil. What did she do? I lean back, remembering what Sheriff Porter told me years later after he'd pieced together the evidence. She thought about Thomas, I say. About the promise she'd made him, to protect their legacy, to keep the ranch safe. But she also thought about those soldiers, young men who'd be riding through Devil's Teeth in 4 days, thinking they were safe, who'd be cut down by a firing platform they never saw coming. And Katherine realized something that changed everything. Katherine sat in the darkness of the underground passage, back against cold stone, and finally let herself feel the weight of it all. She'd killed people during the war, not many. Her role had been intelligence, not combat, but enough. The courier at Sharpsburg haunted her still. That young Confederate reading his mother's letter. The shot that saved 3,000 Union soldiers but ended one boy's life. She'd vowed after the war, never again. No more killing, no more death by her hand. For 17 years, she'd kept that vow. Built a life with Thomas based on creation, not destruction. Raised cattle instead of raising rifles. Made quilts instead of making war. But these men at Devil's Teeth were planning to kill. Federal soldiers just doing their duty. And she had the skills to stop it. If she walked away, she'd keep her hands clean, keep her vow, stay Katherine Blackwood. But those soldiers would die, and she'd know she could have prevented it. "Thomas," she whispered into the darkness, "I need you to tell me what to do." His voice came back to her crystal clear from their last conversation before pneumonia took him. "Katie, you've always been afraid of who you used to be, afraid Phantom would take over. But you're not her anymore. You're both, the warrior and the wife, and maybe that's your strength. Maybe you can use those skills without becoming that person again." "How?" she'd asked. "By never forgetting why you're using them. I fought because I believed in protecting the innocent. You scouted because you believed in saving lives. That's not evil, Katie, that's courage." Katherine touched the wedding ring hanging on the chain around her neck. "I can stop them," she said aloud. "Without killing anyone. I can disable their position, create chaos, recover the cattle, and get out. Just like Thunder Basin. Just tactics and terrain." She could feel Thomas smiling at that. Could almost hear him say, "That's my Katie, strong enough to fight, wise enough to show mercy." Katherine emerged from the passage as full darkness settled over Devil's Teeth Canyon. She had 4 days before the convoy arrived. 4 days to recover 13 cattle, destroy a firing platform, and stop an ambush. 4 days to be Phantom one more time. And this time, she'd do it her way. Not the Army's way. Not the war's way. Her way. Using lethal skills with non-lethal purpose. Precision without killing. Protection through restraint. If she could pull that off, maybe she really could integrate both sides of herself, the warrior and the widow, Phantom and Katherine. Maybe Thomas had been right all along. I pause, noting how late it's gotten. The sleet has stopped, replaced by heavy silence that only deep snow brings. That's where Katherine made her decision, I tell the journalist. Not just to recover her cattle, but to stop a military ambush, to save lives using the same skills she'd used to take them during the war. But this time she'd do it without killing anyone. That was her line, her vow to Thomas. No matter what happened, no matter how dangerous it got, she would not cross that line. The journalist looks skeptical. Against 20 armed men, how could she possibly— "That's tomorrow's story," I interrupt. How one woman with a rifle and tactical genius dismantled a fortified position, how she turned their own discipline against them, how she became a ghost they couldn't fight because they couldn't find her. I stand, signaling the evening's done. Come back tomorrow, and I'll tell you about the night Katherine Blackwood burned Devil's Teeth Canyon to the ground without firing a single shot at a human being. About how Phantom taught a gang of killers that the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who wants to kill you, it's the one who doesn't need to. As the journalist leaves, I remain at the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. Katherine kept her vow. Through everything that happened next, the fire at Devil's Teeth, the confrontation at Jackknife Creek, the final bluff that recovered her last cattle, she never killed anyone. She proved something that night, something most people never understand. True strength isn't the willingness to use violence. It's the skill to stop violence without becoming violent yourself. And Katherine Blackwood, widow, rancher, quilter, and phantom, had that strength in abundance. Tomorrow, I'll tell him how she used it. The journalist arrives on the fourth evening with a bottle of good whiskey, not the cheap stuff I serve most customers. He sets it on the bar between us. For the ending, he says. However it goes. I appreciate the gesture. Pour us both a proper measure. You're a good listener, I tell him. This story deserves that. Outside, the snow has finally stopped. Stars are coming out, the kind of clear, cold night that makes the whole world feel bigger. Montana sky. The same sky Katherine saw that night at Devil's Teeth. When I left off, I say, Katherine had made her choice. She was going to stop the ambush, recover her cattle, and do it all without killing a single soul. Tall order for one woman against 20 armed men. So how did she do it? I smile. With fire, timing, and the kind of tactical brilliance that made her a legend during the war. Let me tell you about the night Phantom burned Devil's Teeth Canyon. Katherine waited until the small hours of the morning, 3 a.m., when human vigilance is at its lowest, when even trained sentries fight the weight of their own eyelids. She'd spent the previous day studying guard rotations, memorizing patrol patterns, identifying critical vulnerabilities. The same methodical preparation she'd used during reconnaissance missions 20 years ago. Now, positioned on the canyon's eastern rim with her Sharps rifle, she reviewed her plan one final time. The firing platform was their tactical centerpiece. Destroy it, and the entire ambush strategy collapsed. But, more importantly, its destruction would create chaos, fear, and the impression of attack from superior forces. Psychological warfare. Make 20 men feel like they're facing 50. Katherine loaded one of her specialized incendiary rounds, the ones she'd modified during the war for disabling artillery without explosives. Adjusted her telescopic sight for distance and the specific light conditions of pre-dawn darkness. Then she waited for the wind to shift, for the guard rotation to position sentries with their backs to her location, for everything to align perfectly. Patience, always patience. At 3:17 a.m., conditions were optimal. Katherine took a measured breath, held it briefly, then exhaled halfway before squeezing the trigger with practiced precision. The Sharps report echoed across the canyon, but before anyone could react to the sound, her specialized round struck the firing platform's central support beam. The projectile embedded itself in the wood and ignited, creating intense, localized heat that rapidly spread to surrounding timbers. Within seconds, flames climbed the structure. Shouts of alarm erupted throughout the camp as men rushed to address the unexpected fire. Katherine allowed them exactly 45 seconds of frantic activity before implementing the second phase. Her next shot targeted the supply tent on the opposite side of camp, another incendiary round, another fire springing to life. The impression was immediate. Coordinated attack from multiple directions. Men rushed in different directions, their disciplined response deteriorating as conflicting priorities competed for attention. Fight the fire at the platform? Protect the supplies? Find the attackers? Katherine's third shot exploited this growing confusion, striking a stack of wooden crates near the cattle pen. The resulting fire created perfect conditions to agitate her remaining 13 head, Animals already unsettled by unfamiliar handlers, now confronted with nearby flames and shouting men. The cattle broke through their barriers, scattering in multiple directions. From her elevated position, Katherine produced her tin whistle and sounded the distinctive three-note pattern, the same signal she'd used at Thunder Basin. 6 of her cattle, including 3 Thomas had personally selected, responded immediately. They changed direction, moving purposefully toward the eastern wall, where the underground passage emerged. While the combined forces struggled with spreading fires and escaping cattle, Katherine activated her final element. Smoke compositions positioned to create the impression of multiple attackers moving along both canyon rims. Through her scope, she observed the progressive deterioration of their command cohesion, Isaiah Coulter and the scarred commander shouting contradictory orders. Marcus Reed attempting to organize defensive positions against an enemy that existed primarily in their imagination. The firing platform collapsed in a shower of sparks, their primary tactical advantage gone. Katherine withdrew from her position and made her way to the underground passage. She needed to reach the canyon floor before they regained control, guide her cattle to safety while chaos provided cover. The descent took 12 minutes. Emerging from the concealed opening, she found 6 cattle gathered nearby, responding to her earlier whistle. With Ghost retrieved from his hidden ravine, she guided them along the eastern wall toward a narrow gap leading to a secondary canyon. Her intimate knowledge of the terrain, painstakingly documented over 15 years, provided escape routes the gang didn't know existed. By the time the combined forces began to re-establish control, Katherine and 6 recovered cattle were already a mile distant, moving steadily through terrain that concealed their passage. Behind them, the glow of multiple fires illuminated Devil's Teeth Canyon, the systematic dismantling of carefully laid plans by a single opponent they never saw. 17 cattle recovered, I tell the journalist. 7 still remained. But Katherine had accomplished something more important. She destroyed their ambush position. Without that firing platform, their plan to intercept the military convoy couldn't work. So was she done? I shake my head. She thought so. Planned to recover the last 7 cattle from whatever remained of the gang, then go home. But the next morning, everything changed. Katherine had just secured her 17 cattle in the hidden valley when she spotted movement on the trail below. 5 riders heading northwest. Leading them, Isaiah Coulter in his distinctive red vest. Through her telescope, she saw they were heavily armed, moving with urgency, and heading toward Jackknife Creek, the bridge. Katherine's tactical mind immediately understood. If the firing platform was destroyed, the alternate plan would be direct interception. The wooden bridge spanning Jackknife Creek was the only crossing point for military wagons, perfect choke point for a smaller force. They were adapting, still planning to hit the convoy, and among the 5 riders she could see pack animals loaded with what looked like explosives. They weren't just planning to ambush the convoy, they were planning to destroy the bridge with it. Katherine made her decision in seconds. The 7 remaining cattle would have to wait. Innocent soldiers were still in danger. She mounted Ghost and set course for Jackknife Creek, cutting across country using routes that would get her there first. The gelding was trail-worn, but responded to her urgency with the steady determination that had carried her this far. 3 hours of hard riding brought her to an elevated promontory overlooking the creek. Below, the wooden bridge spanned spring-swollen water. And on the northern approach, Coulter's group was already positioning explosives on the bridge supports. Katherine studied the tactical situation. 5 entrenched men with excellent defensive coverage. Approaching them directly would be suicide. But she had elevation, distance, and the Sharp's rifle. She set up her firing position 400 yards from the bridge. Loaded standard ammunition, not incendiary rounds. The bridge needed to survive. Her first target, the main detonation wire. The shot was technically difficult, small target at extreme distance, but Katherine had made harder shots during the war. The Sharp's report echoed across the creek bed. Her bullet severed the wire precisely where it connected to the firing mechanism. Confusion erupted below. They'd expected pursuit from behind, not precision fire from an elevated position they hadn't scouted. Catherine's second shot destroyed their backup detonation box. Now they couldn't collapse the bridge regardless of what happened next. With their explosive strategy neutralized, she began systematic suppression fire. Not at the men, at their equipment. Rifle rests shattered, ammunition boxes punctured, water canteens struck. Each shot eliminated specific tactical capabilities while avoiding human targets. Through her scope, she observed something unexpected. A sixth rider, a woman, emerging from cover near Coulter's position. Moving toward the gang's firing positions like she was trying to stop them. Sarah Coulter, Isaiah's sister. Katherine had seen her at Devil's Teeth, always separate from the main group, always looking troubled. One of Coulter's men swung his rifle toward Sarah. Katherine made a split-second decision. The only time during the entire pursuit she aimed at a person instead of an object. Her bullet struck the rifle itself, tearing it from the shooter's hands. The impact sent him spinning backward, unharmed but terrified. Sarah fell, hit by fragments from the shattered weapon, wounded but alive. In that moment, the distant sound of wagon wheels announced the approaching convoy. 3 military wagons with mounted escorts appearing on the southern horizon. The convoy commander, a lieutenant with cavalry insignia, immediately recognized the tactical situation upon seeing gunfire near the crossing point. He deployed his troops in defensive formation while halting the wagons at safe distance. Caught between Katherine's precision fire and organized military response, Coulter's remaining men faced impossible odds. White fabric rose from their position. Surrender. Katherine watched from her hidden position as soldiers advanced cautiously, securing prisoners. She saw them carefully carry Sarah Coulter, alive, being tended by a military surgeon. The woman had made her choice. Tried to stop her brother's plan, nearly died for it, but she'd live. Katherine had made sure of that. The ambush was stopped, I tell the journalist. Federal soldiers saved, the bridge intact, and Katherine had done it all without killing a single person. But she still had 7 cattle to recover and a promise to keep. The journalist refills our glasses. How did she get the rest? I lean back, savoring this part. With the boldest move of all, I say. She walked right into Devil's Teeth Canyon wearing a Union cavalry officer's coat and demanded their surrender. 2 days after Jackknife Creek, Katherine returned to Devil's Teeth, but not as Phantom, not as the invisible sniper who'd burned their camp. She rode openly, wearing her cavalry officer's coat, Union blue with brass buttons, hair pulled back in formal military style, every inch the decorated officer she'd once been. The scarred commander, Blackwell, and Marcus Reed waited at the canyon entrance with a dozen men. They'd rebuilt some defensive positions, but their morale was clearly broken. The firing platform gone, Coulter captured, their carefully laid plans in ruins. Katherine reined Ghost to a halt at precisely the correct military distance. "I am Captain Katherine Mercer," she announced, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command. "Special Assignment Division. I'm here regarding ongoing territorial violations and unauthorized paramilitary activities." Marcus Reed's eyes widened in recognition. He'd heard the legends. Phantom. The Union ghost who'd terrorized Confederate forces during the war. "It's you," he said quietly. "You're real." "Your associate Isaiah Coulter has been detained at Jackknife Creek," Katherine continued, ignoring his comment. "The military convoy you targeted now carries both prisoners and evidence. My presence here represents your final opportunity for negotiated resolution before federal cavalry deployment." It was a calculated bluff. No cavalry was coming, but these men had no way to verify that. Reed stepped forward. "Captain Mercer, the war's been over 17 years. And yet you're building firing platforms to ambush federal soldiers," Katherine replied. "Doesn't sound very over to me." Blackwell shifted uncomfortably. The psychological impact of facing an opponent he'd never seen, who'd systematically dismantled his operation, was evident in his posture. "What are you proposing?" he asked. "Immediate return of all civilian property, surrender of all unauthorized military equipment, your complete withdrawal from territorial boundaries within 24 hours. In exchange, your remaining personnel receive safe passage rather than detention." Reed and Blackwell exchanged glances. They were beaten, and they knew it. "The cattle are in the northern pen," Reed said, "unharmed." "And you'll withdraw?" Katherine pressed. Blackwell nodded slowly. "We'll be gone by sunrise." "One more thing," Reed added, his voice quieter now, speaking only to Katherine. "Your secret stays buried. Katherine Blackwood remains a widow rancher. Phantom stays a legend. We both deserve peace, Captain." Katherine held his gaze, saw genuine respect there, warrior recognizing warrior. "Agreed," she said. By sunset on April 8th, Katherine rode back toward her ranch with all 24 cattle, every last one, including Samson, walking beside Ghost with that familiar, patient gait. 4 days. She'd recovered everything Thomas had built in just 4 days. The journey home took longer. The cattle were exhausted. Katherine was exhausted. But they moved steadily, following familiar trails back to familiar ground. As they crested the final ridge overlooking her valley, Katherine stopped. Let herself really see it. The log cabin Thomas had built, the barn they'd raised together, the meadow where Samson would sire the next generation. Home. She guided the cattle into their pen, counted them one final time, all 24. Then she sat on the porch in Thomas's chair for the first time since he died and allowed herself to feel the weight of it all. She'd kept her promise, protected their legacy, used the skills from her darkest days to save what they'd built together. And she'd done it without killing anyone, without becoming the person she'd feared she might. Phantom and Katherine, integrated at last. Sheriff Porter rode up just after sunset. He dismounted slowly, studying Katherine with new understanding. "All of them?" he asked, nodding toward the cattle. "Everyone." Porter pulled something from his saddlebag, old military records, a photograph of a younger Katherine in cavalry uniform. "Found these in the territorial archives," he said. "Captain Katherine Mercer, decorated for valor at Antietam, Sharpsburg, Chickamauga." Katherine said nothing, just waited. Porter walked to her fire pit and dropped the documents in, struck a match. "Never found them," he said, watching the papers burn. "And I never will." "Why?" "Because you saved those soldiers at Jackknife Creek, stopped a military ambush, recovered stolen property." Porter met her eyes. "The law isn't always right, Mrs. Blackwood, and right isn't always legal. You did right. That's enough for me." He tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Katherine alone with her cattle, her memories, and her peace. I finished the whiskey, noting how the journalist has tears in his eyes. Good. This story deserves that kind of feeling. Katherine lived quietly after that, I tell him. Went back to ranching, quilting, keeping to herself. The town treated her differently, more respect, less pity, but nobody asked questions. Some mysteries are better left mysterious. "And the cattle?" he asks. "Samson sired 14 calves that fall. Katherine built the herd exactly like Thomas planned. By 1890, she had 60 head, finest stock in 3 territories. She never remarried? Never. Said she'd had her great love. One was enough for a lifetime." I stand, stretching. Time to finish this right. In the spring of 1893, Katherine sold the ranch to a young couple from Missouri. Said she wanted to see the ocean before she got too old. Last I heard, she's living in a little town in Northern California, still making quilts, still keeping to herself. She's alive? The journalist looks surprised. 61 years old now, and finally, truly at peace. I walk to the window, looking out at the stars. That's the real ending, you see. Not death, not glory, just peace. The right to live out her days, quiet and unknown after everything she'd done. Will you tell me where to find her? No. My voice is firm. She earned her privacy through blood and sacrifice. The stories told, the legends preserved. The woman gets to live her life in peace. That's how it should be. The journalist closes his notebook. What about you? Why tell me now? Because I'm 73 years old, I say. Consumption's taking me, same as it took others. And before I go, somebody needed to know the truth. That the best heroes aren't the ones who want glory. They're the ones who do what's right and then disappear. Katherine Blackwood proved something that spring of 1882, proved that the skills born from our darkest days can be redeemed, that warriors can find peace, that the strongest people aren't the ones who never break. They're the ones who break, heal, and still have courage to fight when it matters most. I pour one last measure of whiskey, raise the glass toward the mountains. To Katherine Blackwood, I say, to Phantom, to the widow who became a legend and chose to be forgotten. May she watch the Pacific sunset every evening and know she kept every promise that mattered. The journalist raises his own glass. We drink in silence. Then he gathers his things and prepares to leave. Will you publish this? I ask. He pauses at the door. Would she want me to? No. Then I won't. He tips his hat. Some stories are more valuable as secrets. Thank you for trusting me with it. After he leaves, I sit alone in the empty saloon. Outside, the Montana stars burn cold and bright. The same stars Katherine sees from California. The same stars that watched over her during those 4 days when she became Phantom one last time. I like to think she's sitting on a porch somewhere tonight, wrapped in one of her quilts, watching the ocean. At peace with both sides of herself, the warrior and the widow, the legend and the woman. And I like to think Thomas is proud of her. Wherever he is, she kept every promise. Protected everything they built. Did it her way, with restraint and mercy. 24 cattle, not a single life taken. That's not just victory, that's grace. The fire burns low. I bank the coals and lock up for the night. Tomorrow I'll open the saloon like always. Serve drinks, listen to stories, keep this particular secret safe. Because Frank McGrath knows the difference between truth that should be told and truth that should be protected. And Katherine Blackwood's truth, her whole truth, warrior and widow both, that deserves protection. Some legends are better left as whispers. Some heroes prefer to be forgotten. And some promises, once kept, echo forever in the mountains they were made to protect. The snow begins falling again as I walk home, soft and silent, covering everything in white, making the world clean and new, just like Katherine got to start clean and new after proving she could be both people at once. Phantom and Katherine, legend and woman, hero and human, all of it true, all of it her, and all of it finally at peace. The end.